So if I leave Springer in mid-February, I should get to Katahdin by the middle or end of itineraries and mileage goals. I'm pretty certain everybody has one when it comes to an attempt of a through hike of the Appalachian Trail, much less any long distance hike. Hey YouTube, my name is Todd and I want to welcome you to Hiking a Different Path. This channel is all about my preparation, planning, and attempt of a through hike of the AT in 2021. Now, if you're planning or interested in what it will take to do this thing, be sure and subscribe, hit the bell notification. There's new content every week. Last week, I talked about the fact that my plans for the AT call for a northbound or NOBO attempt, as well as a proposed start date of mid-February of 2021, depending on the weather. I really prefer to hike and sleep in colder temperatures, so an early start is in my best interest on that point. I'm also not a spring chicken, meaning I'm old, and therefore I need to allow as much time as possible for me to complete the through hike before Katahdin and Baxter State Park close for the season. So time is an issue. For some through hikers, there's the issue of needing to be done by a certain date, and that date is not related to Katahdin closing. Maybe they could only squirrel off a limited amount of time from their job to get the attempt done in. Maybe they have a firm start date on a new job and they need to finish before that. Could be a wedding, a birth, or any number of hard and fast dates that are weighing on that hiker. This is a point of stress. How do I feel about stress? Not a fan. Don't get me wrong. I have a history of being at my best when things are really stressful or when faced with a major emergency. Things tend to get really clear and I can process things both in hyperspeed and slow motion all in the same instance. You know, kind of like they do on TV. But just because you can do a thing does not mean that you should do a thing. Thusly, I try to avoid stress. Planning is my drug of choice here. I've got plans for my plans. Contingencies on top of contingencies. Too much planning for the average person, I promise. So I tend to keep all of those plans to myself and just see what happens in order to react accordingly. When I was a systems trainer and we would write process manuals, the if-then charts were a staple. If this happens or appears, then do this action, use this keystroke, enter this data, and continue to the next step. If then, on and on and on for every step, every contingency until a process was completed. So stress avoidance, or more specifically stressors within my control, is a key strategy for me. I can't control the weather. I generally don't mind hiking in the rain provided it's not a monsoon. I'm not a fan of ridiculous heat and humidity, but it's gonna happen. It's really more mind over matter. If I don't mind, then it don't matter. However, the stressors of time is still a concern, so I'm allowing myself as much of it as I can muster. The length of the through hike will be a factor of how many miles I can average per day over the course of the attempt, keeping in mind that there will be most certainly 0 days in the process, and any number of things could happen to pull me off the trail. Personal injury, a family concern, a death. Insert your least preferred event to take place right there. So, how do I plan for a normal day's hiking? I have a tendency to approach hiking like this. A normal day's hiking will consist of a long, an average, and a bailout distance for that day. Long may be 15 to 18 miles or more, so if I'm feeling super well, the terrain is easier than what I expected, my energy is holding up better than expected, etc., then I'll plan to hike from point A to shelter or point D that day. An average plan could be in the 10 to 14 mile range, so if I'm feeling pretty good, the terrain's as expected, my energy's solid, etc., then I'll plan to hike from point A to shelter or point C on that day. The bailout may be anything less than the average, so if I'm hurting somewhere and can't gut it out, the weather or the terrain are kicking my tail that day, my energy is zero, or I'm physically ill, whatever, then I'll go from point A to point B and pray for a speedy, quiet death in my sleep. Yeah, I know, monotonous, isn't it? You hate me already. I know. You're making a mental note that if you run into me on the AT that year, don't hike with that psycho. It's okay, I understand. I keep all of this to myself and will move from one plan to any number of other parallel options through the course of the day in complete silence and not burden anyone around me with any of my myriad of options. Should I actually be hiking with someone else and they ask my plans for the day, the response will probably be, well, hopefully to X point. We'll see how it goes. Very duck-like, smooth on the surface, almost disinterested, and paddling like the dickens underneath. These are my issues, and I choose not to make them yours. In my mind, the beauty of this process is that I'm not tied to any one plan or daily outcome or timeline. In his book, Extreme Ownership, Jocko Willink shares the concept of discipline equals freedom. This is really what I'm trying to do with all the planning and the plans, is to have as many options so that when the moment comes, whether adversity or opportunity, I can move in a more seamless and free manner in whatever direction I deem is necessary or desired. So now comes the question of how long will my through hike take and how many miles will I average per day? The short answer is between 5 and 6 months and around 15 miles per day. The real answer is, I have no clue. Funny thing is, this really ticks non-hikers off and maybe a few avid hikers as well. They can't understand how or why I would walk 2,179 miles to begin with, much less without having figured out the number of miles to do each day or a hard end date in mind. Oh, how I do enjoy messing with the general population. Look, I have goals and ideas as stated earlier. I'm just not married to anyone in particular. Each day is going to be what it is going to be. I believe I have a responsibility to myself to push myself somewhat, but more so an obligation to keep this thing as enjoyable as possible. So I'll need to remember to sing and dance in the rain and to lay in a ridiculously cold stream on those days when my brain feels like it's going to melt out of my ears, or savor that dehydrated meal a little bit more until I can get to a town and stuff myself stupid on whatever food group has completely hijacked my every thought process for the past 3 days. More than likely, something that is abhorrently unhealthy but luxuriously satisfying. Dude, I can't wait to see what that's gonna be. I have every reason to believe that as I get further along in the hike, the daily miles will get higher and the timeline will grow shorter, but I'm not counting my chickens before they get hatched. I'm optimistic, but practical at the same time. So, how do you plan mileage goals each day? Are you a hardcore walking warrior with the heart of a cheetah or a tepid turtle? Please share your ideas and concerns in the comments section below. And until next Monday, take a hike. Love somebody along the way.